Hello, my dear friend. Welcome. Come in and find a place to rest. However you've come to be here, whatever weight you carry on your shoulders or in your heart, I want you to know this space is for you. Perhaps you're feeling worn down, like life has been asking more of you than you have to give. Maybe you're carrying burdens that feel too heavy or fighting battles that seem too long. If that's you today, I want you to know, with every fiber of my being, that you are not alone in feeling this way. Even the strongest among God's people have found themselves in places of deep exhaustion. So today, let's not strive. Let's simply settle in and remember together. Let's share stories, ancient stories, yes, but stories that beat with the same heartache and hope that ours do. Stories of a prophet who reached the end of his strength, a shepherd king who knew fear and solace, and a father who runs to meet his children on the long road home. Our journey begins in a wilderness, under the harsh, unrelenting sun. Picture with me the prophet Elijah, sitting alone under a small broom tree. The desert heat is a physical force, but Elijah barely notices it. His heart is so heavy, his spirit so crushed, that the physical discomfort seems small compared to the weight pressing down on his soul. Just days before, this same man had witnessed one of the most powerful displays of God's presence. On Mount Carmel, fire had fallen from heaven, consuming a water-drenched sacrifice, proving that the Lord was God. The people had fallen on their faces in worship. It should have been a moment of triumph, a time of celebration. But sometimes, our greatest victories are followed by our deepest valleys. A single threat from Queen Jezebel shattered his courage, and Elijah ran. He ran until he couldn't run anymore, and now he sat alone, feeling abandoned, afraid, and utterly spent. Have you ever felt that whiplash? Have you ever wondered how you could go from feeling God's presence so strongly to feeling so completely, devastatingly alone? Under that scraggly broom tree, with the dust of his flight still clinging to his robes, Elijah prayed a prayer that might surprise you. He asked God to take his life. "I have had enough, Lord," he whispered, his voice raw. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." This mighty prophet, who had called down fire from heaven, was so bone-weary that he couldn't imagine taking another step. But here is what I love. What gives me hope on my own exhausted days. God didn't scold Elijah for his honesty. He didn't lecture him about faith or courage. Instead, our tender Father did the most beautiful, practical thing. He let Elijah sleep. Sometimes, my friend, the most spiritual thing we can do is simply rest. While Elijah slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the utterly depleted, God sent an angel to care for him. The angel didn't shake him awake with urgency. He touched him gently and said, "Get up and eat." There, beside Elijah's head, was fresh bread, still warm from heaven's oven, and a jar of cool, clear water. Elijah ate, drank, and then, because profound weariness cannot be cured with one meal, he lay down again and slept some more. The angel came a second time, again with that gentle touch and that simple provision. "Get up and eat," he said, "for the journey is too much for you." What strikes me most about this story is God's incredible tenderness toward his weary servant. He didn't rush Elijah through his recovery. He didn't demand immediate strength or faith. Instead, he provided exactly what Elijah needed most: rest, nourishment, and the quiet, unspoken assurance of his presence. This is how our God cares for us when we're worn down by life's demands. He doesn't stand over us with crossed arms, tapping his foot impatiently while we struggle. He sits beside us in our weariness, providing what we need and holding us close while we rest. Maybe today you feel like Elijah under that broom tree. Maybe you're carrying responsibilities that feel overwhelming, facing challenges that seem impossible. If so, I want you to hear God's gentle invitation to you right now. Rest doesn't always mean sleep, though sometimes it does. Rest means laying down the weight of trying to carry everything on your own. It means admitting that you're human, with human limitations and human needs. It means trusting that God's love for you isn't based on your strength or your performance, but simply on the fact that you are his beloved child. Jesus speaks this same invitation to every weary heart. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He sees your exhaustion. He knows your burdens, and he offers himself as your place of rest. His yoke is easy and his burden is light, because when we're yoked with him, he carries the heavy end. This truth finds a beautiful echo in the life of a man who knew both triumph and terror, King David. Before he was a king, before he was a warrior, David was a shepherd boy. He spent long, lonely days and nights in the fields outside Bethlehem, caring for his father's sheep. It was there, in the quiet pastures and dark valleys, that he learned the deepest truths about God's character. He penned a psalm that has been a shelter for millions of souls. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." David knew each sheep in his care by name. He knew their habits, their quirks, which ones were prone to wander. He knew their needs before they did, leading them to fresh pasture before they grew hungry, to still waters before they became thirsty. And he knew that sheep are afraid of rushing, noisy water. They need quiet pools, gentle streams where they can drink in peace. "He leads me beside still waters," David wrote, and in doing so, he gave us a picture of our shepherd's heart. He doesn't force us to find refreshment in the midst of chaos. He leads us to places of stillness, to quiet moments where our souls can be restored. David's psalm takes us through every season of life. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Those are the good times, the seasons of abundance. He leads me beside still waters. Those are the peaceful moments of refreshment. But David doesn't stop there, because life doesn't stop there. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Notice he doesn't say, "if you walk through the valley." He says, "though." He acknowledges that dark valleys are part of the journey, not detours from it. But here's the beautiful anchoring truth. Even in the darkest valley, you are not alone. Your shepherd is with you. His rod and his staff, the tools of his protection and guidance, they comfort you. He doesn't always remove the valley, but he always walks through it with you. I think of times in my own life when the valley felt so dark I couldn't see the path ahead. Times when loss pressed so heavy I could barely breathe, when fear whispered so loud I couldn't hear anything else. But even in those moments, there was a presence, quiet but unmistakable, walking beside me, holding me up when I stumbled. Your shepherd knows exactly where you are today. If you're in green pastures, he's rejoicing with you. If you're beside still waters, he's refreshing your soul. And if you're in a dark valley, he's right there with you. His presence closer than your own heartbeat. This promise of his presence leads us to another story, one that answers a deep, haunting question we all ask in the wilderness. Does anyone see me? Have you ever felt invisible? Not just unnoticed, but truly unseen, like you could disappear and no one would realize you were gone? There was a woman who knew this feeling well. Her name was Hagar. She was an Egyptian servant in Abraham's household, far from home, with no rights and no one to advocate for her. When her mistress Sarah couldn't have children, Hagar became part of a plan she had no choice in. But when she became pregnant, tensions erupted. Sarah treated her so harshly that Hagar did the only thing she could think to do. She ran away. She fled into the wilderness, pregnant and alone, with nowhere to go and no one to help her. She sat by a spring of water, probably crying tears of desperation and fear. She was a woman with no options, no future, no hope. She must have felt completely abandoned, utterly alone, absolutely invisible to anyone who might care. But that's when something beautiful happened. The angel of the Lord found her there, not by accident, but intentionally. He sought her out in her hiding place, called her by name, and gave her a promise that would change everything. He told her to return, but he also gave her a vision of her future, that her son would become the father of a great nation. This forgotten servant woman was seen by God and given a destiny, and Hagar's response? She gave God a name that had never been used before. El Roi, the God who sees me. She said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." In her moment of deepest isolation, she discovered that she was never truly alone. God had seen her all along. Hagar's story is your story and mine. Maybe you haven't run away to a literal wilderness, But perhaps you found yourself in an emotional or spiritual wilderness, a place of loneliness, rejection, or despair. The same God who saw Hagar sees you. The same God who sought her out in the wilderness seeks you out in yours. You are not invisible to him. You are not forgotten. He sees the tears you cry in private, the fears that keep you awake at night, the dreams you've been afraid to voice aloud. In a world that often values people based on their productivity or achievements, it's revolutionary to know that God sees you simply because you are his. You don't have to earn his attention. You matter. Your story matters. This God who sees us is also the God who provides for us, often in the most unexpected ways. He has a beautiful habit of doing the impossible in impossible places. He specializes in bringing life where there seems to be none. Remember the Israelites in the wilderness? Millions of people walking through a barren desert. When their water ran out, panic set in. They came to Moses, their voices raised in complaint and fear. "Why did you bring us out here to die of thirst?" But Moses cried out to God, and God told him to do something that must have seemed absurd. Strike a rock. A rock. Not dig a well, not send scouts for an oasis. Strike a rock. And when Moses did, water poured out. Not a trickle, but enough for millions of people and their animals. Fresh, cool, life-giving water flowing from solid stone. That rock in the desert became a reminder for generations that God can bring streams of refreshment even in the driest, most hopeless circumstances. He can make a way where there seems to be no way. Maybe your desert looks different. Maybe it's a season of financial struggle or relational difficulty or a health battle. In these dry places, it's easy to focus on what's lacking. But God wants you to know that he specializes in bringing refreshment to the exact places where refreshment seems impossible. Your desert season has an expiration date. It's not your permanent address. As Isaiah promised, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." Sometimes his provision comes in ways we don't expect. Sometimes the stream in our desert looks like an unexpected kindness from a stranger. An opportunity that opens just when we need it most, or a peace that settles over our hearts, even when circumstances haven't changed. This provision often asks for our trust in return. And trust can feel like a fragile thing, can't it? We live in a world that tells us to take charge, make things happen, never show weakness. We admire people who seem to have everything under control. But there is a different kind of strength, a quiet, steady strength that comes from learning to trust. It's the strength that eagles know when they stop flapping and start soaring, carried by winds they didn't create, but learn to trust. Proverbs 3:5-6 offers us this beautiful invitation. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. This isn't about being weak or passive. It's about finding a strength so deep and secure that it doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. It's the strength that comes not from striving, but from surrendering, not from fighting, but from trusting. I think of a river guide named Grace. She took tourists on rafting trips down dangerous rapids. One day, a businessman joined her group, a man used to being in control. As soon as they launched, he began paddling frantically in every direction, convinced his effort would keep them safe. But his frantic paddling was actually making the raft harder to steer. "Sir," Grace called out calmly, "I need you to trust me. Stop fighting the river and follow my lead. I know these waters, and I know how to get us through safely." It took several minutes of struggle before the man finally stopped and began to follow Grace's guidance. As soon as he did, the raft began to move smoothly through the rapids, dancing with the current rather than fighting against it. He had discovered something he'd never known before. There was incredible strength in learning to trust someone who knew the way. This is what God invites us to experience. We often approach life's challenges with frantic effort, convinced that if we just try harder, plan better, or control more carefully, we can navigate safely. But God, like that wise river guide, knows the waters we're traveling through better than we ever could. Learning to trust God with all our hearts means releasing our grip on the outcomes we think we need. It means acknowledging that our understanding is limited compared to his infinite wisdom. This kind of trust allows us to face uncertainty without being overwhelmed by fear. It enables us to encounter setbacks without being crushed by disappointment. When we learn to soar on the winds of God's grace, instead of flapping frantically with our own effort, we find we can go higher and farther than we ever imagined. When we learn to draw from His strength instead of depleting our own, we discover a source of power that never runs dry. This trust becomes the anchor for our souls, especially when the storms of life hit. And they will hit. There's something particularly frightening about being caught in a storm on water. On land, you can find shelter. But on water, there's nowhere to run. Just you, your boat, and the overwhelming power of wind and waves. The disciples knew this fear. They were on the Sea of Galilee with Jesus when a furious storm arose. These experienced fishermen fought the storm with everything they had, bailing water, struggling to keep the boat pointed into the waves. But the storm was winning. Water was filling the boat faster than they could remove it, and through it all, Jesus slept. Can you imagine their thoughts? Here they were, fighting for their lives, and their master, the one they'd left everything to follow, was sound asleep. Finally, they shook him awake, their voices a mixture of panic and frustration. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus stood up in that storm-tossed boat and spoke 3 simple words. "Quiet, be still." Immediately, not gradually but immediately, the wind died down and the waves became perfectly calm. The sudden silence must have been almost as shocking as the storm itself. He turned to his disciples and asked, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Maybe you're in a storm right now that feels overwhelming. Maybe it's not wind and waves, but medical bills that keep piling up, a relationship that's falling apart, or dreams that seem to be drowning in disappointment. And maybe, like the disciples, you've wondered where Jesus is in your storm. But here's what I want you to see. Jesus wasn't absent from the storm. He was right there in the boat with them. The storm didn't surprise him or frighten him because he knew something they didn't know yet. He had complete authority over everything that threatened them. The same Jesus who calmed that ancient storm is with you in your storm today. He hasn't fallen asleep on the job or forgotten about your needs. Sometimes He allows the storm to rage for a while, not because He doesn't care, but because He wants you to experience the miracle of His peace in the middle of chaos. The promise in your storm isn't just that Jesus can calm it. It's that His presence with you in the storm is more powerful than the storm itself. This peace that Jesus offers is different from anything the world can give. It's a peace that doesn't depend on our circumstances being just right. It's a peace that flows from being connected to Him. Picture Jesus in the upper room with His disciples on the night before His crucifixion. The flickering oil lamps cast gentle shadows, but the disciples' hearts were troubled. Jesus had been speaking about leaving them, about going somewhere they couldn't follow. Fear was creeping in. And it was right there in that moment of anxiety and fear that Jesus spoke these tender words. "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God? Believe also in me." His voice was calm, steady, like an anchor dropping into deep water. Then came the promise. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." This wasn't the temporary peace that comes when everything goes our way. This was His peace, the peace that had carried Him through every challenge. It's a peace that flows from being connected to Him, rooted in His love, anchored in His promises. When anxiety knocks on the door of your heart, you can remember Jesus' words. It's a choice, a decision to receive the peace He offers. The Apostle Paul, who knew something about storms and troubles, wrote, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This is a supernatural peace that stands guard over our hearts like a gentle sentinel. It doesn't necessarily change what's happening around us, but it changes what's happening within us. This peace often comes when we learn to be still. In our noisy, fast-paced world, silence has become a rare gift. We're surrounded by constant sound. Traffic, phones, televisions. our own minds spinning with worry. But what if I told you that in the middle of all this noise, there's a quiet place waiting for you? Not necessarily a physical location, but a place of the heart where you can step away from the chaos. Jesus himself sought out these quiet places. Luke tells us, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Not occasionally, but often. It was a pattern, a rhythm, a priority that he protected even when the needs around him seemed urgent. He understood something we often forget. The quiet place isn't a luxury for those who have time left over. The quiet place is where we find the strength, wisdom, and peace we need to handle life's demands in the first place. Your quiet place might be different from anyone else's. Maybe it's those first few minutes when you wake up, before the day demands your attention. Maybe it's during your lunch break or while you're folding laundry. The location matters less than the intention. The decision to step away from the noise and remember that your soul needs this connection. In the stillness, we often hear God's voice most clearly, but he doesn't always speak in the ways we expect. We often look for him in the dramatic, the earthquakes, the fires, the powerful displays, but more often, he chooses the whisper. We see this with Elijah again. After his rest under the broom tree, he went to Mount Horeb, seeking a word from God. God told him to stand on the mountain, for the Lord was about to pass by. First came a powerful wind that tore the mountains apart, but the Lord was not in the wind. Then came an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he covered his face and went out to meet the Lord. He knew this was God's voice. How many of God's whispers do we miss because we're listening for earthquakes? How many gentle nudges do we overlook because we're expecting dramatic signs? God certainly can speak through the dramatic, but more often, he chooses the whisper. He speaks through the quiet prompting to call a friend, the gentle conviction to apologize, the soft encouragement that comes through a stranger's smile. Here's the thing about whispers. You have to be quiet to hear them. You have to lean in, pay attention, create space for listening. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way." Walk in it. God is always speaking, always guiding. The question isn't whether he's speaking, it's whether we're listening. As we learn to listen, we discover another profound truth about our God. His faithfulness is the one unchanging reality in our often shifting lives. In a world where everything seems temporary and fragile, we have access to something eternal and unshakable. Moses, at the end of his life, stood before the people of Israel and declared, "The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms." Think about that image for a moment. Underneath, not above where we might have to reach up, not beside us where we might miss them, but underneath. Like a safety net that's always there, like a foundation that cannot be shaken. These aren't arms that grow weary or weak. They are everlasting, as eternal and unchanging as God himself. They have held every believer who has ever lived, and they will hold every believer yet to come. Maybe today, you feel like you're falling. Perhaps life has knocked you off balance. If that's you, I want you to know about the everlasting arms that are underneath you right now. You may not feel them, but they are there. The God who has been catching his children for thousands of years is the same God who is holding you today. This security allows us to face one of life's most challenging experiences: waiting. We live in a world of instant everything, so when life requires us to wait, it can feel unbearable. Maybe you're in a waiting season right now, for healing, for the right relationship, for a job opportunity. The waiting can be exhausting. There are moments when you wonder if anything will ever change. But God doesn't just tolerate our waiting. He actively works on behalf of those who wait for him. Since ancient times, no one has heard, no ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God besides you, who acts on behalf of those who wait for him. Think about Abraham, who waited 25 years for the son God had promised. Or Hannah, who year after year poured out her heart to God for a child. Or Simeon, who waited his entire adult life to see the Messiah. In each case, God was using the waiting season to prepare hearts, build character, and create the perfect timing for His purposes. The waiting wasn't wasted time. Waiting seasons often feel unproductive, but they're actually some of the most formative times in our spiritual lives. It's during the waiting that we learn to trust God's character rather than relying on our circumstances. It's in the quiet uncertainty that our faith grows deeper roots. God's timing is rarely our timing, but it's always perfect timing. He sees the whole picture while we can only see a small piece. He knows what needs to happen in our hearts before His answer comes. This patient trust is part of what allows us to experience the beautiful mystery of God's strength being made perfect in our weakness. The Apostle Paul understood this deeply. He had a thorn in the flesh, some persistent struggle that he begged God to remove 3 times. But God's answer surprised him. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." This completely changed Paul's perspective. Instead of being ashamed of his weakness, he began to boast about it. "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." Paul discovered that his weakness wasn't a barrier to God's blessing. It was actually the very place where God's power could be most clearly seen. When Paul was strong and capable, people might attribute his success to his own abilities. But when Paul was weak and struggling, it became obvious that any success could only be attributed to God's grace. This truth is revolutionary because it goes against everything our culture tells us. We're told to be strong, self-sufficient, to have it all together. But God says the opposite. He says that our weakness is exactly where His grace shines brightest. God's grace isn't just a gentle overlooking of our faults. It's divine favor, divine enablement. When God says His grace is sufficient, He's saying that His divine power is more than enough to carry you through whatever you're facing. Think about a broken bone that heals. The place where the break occurred often becomes the strongest part of the bone. God's grace works similarly. The places where we've been broken, where we've struggled, where we've had to rely completely on His strength, those often become the places where His power is most evident. Maybe you're struggling with something that makes you feel weak. Maybe you feel like you should be stronger, more joyful, more victorious. But what if God isn't waiting for you to get stronger before He can use you? What if He wants to show His grace most powerfully right where you are in your weakness? Your weakness is not a disqualification. It's an invitation for His grace to be displayed. Your struggles are not evidence that you're failing. They're opportunities for God's power to be made perfect. This grace leads us to perhaps the most beautiful truth of all, the reality of God's forgiveness. There's a weight that guilt carries that nothing else quite matches. It sits on your chest when you try to sleep, whispers in your ear when you try to find peace. Maybe you've been carrying something for days, months, or even years, a mistake you made, words you spoke in anger, a choice you wish you could take back. But tonight, I want to tell you about the most beautiful kind of rest there is, the rest that comes when forgiveness lifts the weight from your soul, not the kind you have to earn, but the kind that runs toward you with open arms while you're still trying to find the courage to come home. Jesus told a story about a young man who asked his father for his inheritance early, essentially saying, "I wish you were dead." He took the money, traveled far away, and spent everything. Soon he was destitute, feeding pigs, and so hungry the pig slop looked good. But in that pig pen, he remembered his father's house. He decided to go home, not as a son. He felt he'd lost that right, but as a servant. He practiced his speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, and the father didn't wait. He ran. This dignified man gathered up his robes and ran down the road. When he reached his son, he threw his arms around him and kissed him before the boy could finish his apology. "Quick!" he called. "Bring the best robe, put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. My son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Maybe you see yourself in this story. Maybe you've been living in your own kind of pig pen, carrying the weight of choices you regret. Perhaps you've been rehearsing your speech, trying to figure out how to earn forgiveness. But here's the beautiful truth. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you receive. God isn't waiting for you to become perfect before He welcomes you home. He's running toward you with open arms, ready to celebrate your homecoming. The rest that comes with forgiveness isn't just the absence of guilt, it's the presence of love that's bigger than your mistakes. It's the peace of knowing that your identity isn't defined by your failures, but by your Father's love. You don't have to carry the weight of guilt anymore. Your Father is running toward you with forgiveness in His eyes and love in His heart. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just, and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. This forgiveness, this grace, this strength in weakness, it all points toward one glorious reality: restoration. There's something profoundly beautiful about watching something broken become whole again. I think of the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired using gold to fill the cracks. The result is breathtaking, a vessel that's not just repaired but transformed into something even more beautiful. The golden seams don't hide the brokenness. They celebrate it, turning scars into art. Paul understood this. He knew what it felt like to be a broken vessel. Yet he discovered something amazing. It was precisely through those broken places that God's glory shone most brightly. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are common, ordinary, fragile clay pots. But we contain an extraordinary treasure, the very presence of God. And it's precisely because the vessels are fragile that the treasure within can shine so brightly. When light shines through cracked pottery, every crack becomes a place where glory can escape. Your brokenness is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new chapter of beauty. God is the master of kintsugi. He specializes in taking broken vessels and filling the cracks with His golden grace. He doesn't discard us when we break. He carefully repairs us, making us more beautiful than we ever were before. This beautiful restoration finds its ultimate fulfillment in the promise of eternity. Every story has an ending, and for those who love God, it is the most beautiful ending ever written. The Apostle John got a glimpse of it. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And he heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." Can you imagine it? A place where God doesn't just visit occasionally, but where He makes His permanent home among His people. A place where His presence is so real that tears become impossible. Pain becomes obsolete. Death becomes powerless. He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new," not repairing the old broken things, making everything completely new. Your tired body, your damaged relationships, your broken heart, all of it made new, perfect, whole. This is the hope that sustains us through every difficulty. This is the joy that makes every sacrifice worth it. We're not just living for today, we're living for forever. And forever with God is more beautiful than we could ever dream. So, my dear friend, as we come to the end of our time together, I want you to carry these truths with you. When you are weary, remember Elijah and find rest. When you are afraid, remember David's shepherd and take comfort. When you feel unseen, remember Hagar and know you are known. When you are in need, remember the water from the rock and trust His provision. When the storms rage, remember Jesus in the boat and receive His peace. When you feel weak, remember Paul's thorn and lean on his strength. When you carry guilt, remember the prodigal son and run home to forgiveness. When you are broken, remember the kintsugi God and await His restoration. And when the journey feels long, remember John's vision and hope in eternity. You are loved. You are seen. You are held. You are never, ever alone. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. Rest in that truth tonight and always. Good night, my friend. May you sleep in peace and wake in hope. Thank you so much for listening and sharing this quiet time with me. It truly is a gift to journey together through these stories of hope and comfort. If the peace and encouragement you found here felt like a gentle light in your day, I would be so grateful if you could help share that light with others. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the simplest way to make sure you never miss our next time together. And if this story resonated with your heart, a like on this video helps these messages of comfort find their way to others who might need them today. Your presence here is a blessing. I'm so looking forward to our next conversation. Until then, may you carry his peace with you. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.